Right, we'll get started then for the final session of the afternoon. Before Dave's bit. Yeah, mandatory scooching forward, please. This is a bit of a fireside chat, so
I hope there's no fire in here.
if there is a fire, the exits are over here. It is. I just made it up.
It's the technical phrase.
So in some ways, a little bit of a background for this session was, if you cast your minds back about 7 years ago, there was a really important vote that occurred actually in this very room. We held a session called In or Out of the Cloud. And it happened to be on the same day as the Brexit vote. We had beer mats. We were voting as to whether we thought as a group the direction was to stay in the data center and hug some servers, go into the cloud. And funnily enough, we couldn't really reach a decision. Although it does seem, a lot of people, the uptake in cloud resources and use of cloud-based systems is definitely there. But that was 7 years ago. So onto the concept of cloud exit. And for this sort of panelette session, sort of group conversation, I'm joined by Sam and Russell. Gents, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
After you.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Sam. I did the session earlier this morning. Currently in the financials. I have a mic here. I'm hoping everyone. I just need to move it up a little bit. There we go. But yeah, so I'm currently in the financial services solutions team in VMware, focusing on our risk and compliance solutions for some of our customers and partners. Yeah.
Thanks. So Russell Vaughan, lead architect at VMware, covering financial services and insurance.
Brilliant. Thanks, gents. So I suppose we should start by defining a bit of terms and terminology. Cloud exit sounds a little bit like the sort of thing you might read on the headline on the register of company X leaves the cloud. If they're giving up on the internet, it's over. What does it actually mean? What does it, particularly, I suppose, initially from a financial slant, which is your specialist, but generally speaking, if someone wants to do a cloud exit, what are they actually doing?
Go ahead.
Okay. I think, to me, I see cloud exit in different ways, and depending on kind of what the requirements are, like obviously cloud exit, public cloud exit is, the name in itself. But I think in terms of this different ways, so there's cross-cloud migration, in terms of thinking, are you able to actually do migration across different clouds? Are you able to repatriate or go from cloud to on-premise? What is the ease in which you're able to do that and have that agility and portability to actually, whether it's migrate where you're running on one public cloud back to on-premise, or from on-premise back to the cloud. So I think just in terms of that migration across the different environments that you may be running.
Okay. So more of sort of cloud agile actions rather than necessarily exiting, which implies somewhat sort of finality to it. But why is it important to be sort of considered? Why are companies looking at what those options are? Is it, I was having a quick chat with a few people at lunchtime. Someone said they're considering moving out the cloud because it was too expensive. They got a bill that was much bigger than on the spreadsheet. Why else would people be wanting to look at these exit strategies?
I think on that, there are many different reasons based on the needs of the customer, but I think cost is definitely one. It also depends on what is like the drivers. I think some drivers are things like cost or business reasons, but other drivers may be actually things like vendor relationship, or in terms of a need to a particular industry to comply with regulation. Actually, you want to say for particular workloads, that's not appropriate for the cloud, and we actually need to show that we can exit the cloud and show that this workload can run on-premise or in a particular jurisdiction. It just depends on what are your drivers. But I would say some key things that are top of mind is cost is definitely one. Vendor relationship is definitely one. Sometimes you might find actually for a particular workload, we want to use this vendor instead because, they have good tooling, good libraries or etc. for this. Other one as well is for certain industries, regulation and the whole compliance aspect. So, in relation to financial services, I think there is a bit. It's a very regulated entity, and there are a couple of ones that are incoming. Some of which we shared in this morning, particularly the Digital Operations Resiliency Act, that is incoming over the next year. Now that one also actually has a lot of enhanced incident management requirements for people using outsourcing critical services on third parties. Wow, that was a mouthful. But yeah, and the cloud is obviously a critical third party. So if you are a banking or a financial services, or even actually just an entity dealing with such, and you're saying we want to go all in the cloud, we want to put all our services in that, pick your favorite cloud, and then actually a regulator saying, can you actually exit this? It should something happen, and it's not just technical. Let's say, vendor-wise, should something happen, are you able to show that actually I can maybe recover my data back, on premises or in a different cloud, etc. Are you able to exit that? And that's something that is now becoming a lot more enhanced with these incoming regulations, whether it's in the EU or the UK 3, which is essentially, a version of such. So I think depending on which industry, depending on your needs, depending on your cost, there are different reasons as to why that conversation comes up. Financial services, a lot of it is actually looking at that.
So the agility of a service basically has to be tested and validated.
Well, I think it's not just the agility of that service.
Okay.
But when you start to look at that sort of, to use the phrase we're talking about, cloud exit side of things, it's more a case of if we experience something like concentration risk. So the general term there meaning that if we're all putting our workloads in this particular basket, what happens if that basket goes? Well, funnily enough, all of your workloads have gone as well, which probably isn't the best thing to have. So being able to, identify that there is that concentration risk in the first place and alleviate that. So finding another basket somewhere over there, for example, to put some of those eggs into, so you have some form of, I would say, abstraction amongst them from an application workload services perspective, but also have that resilience to a degree built within as well.
So it's not necessarily not always about pulling up the drawbridge to the cloud provider and going, no, not use it anymore. It's just maybe moving the risk.
I mean, there are certain circumstances, and we were talking earlier in the breakout there, certain workloads from a, let's say, dipping a toe, testing, piloting, running that from a let's get our feet wet around it, may well sit perfectly within the cloud. But when you want to then productionize that, take that to a large scale, there may be a better way of doing that from an on-premises model. Prime example there, AI.
Yeah, no, but makes a lot of sense that I suppose whilst you might be using resources at a prototyping stage, it's fine, but having that plan. I was also thinking about days gone by of disaster recovery tests when you used to have to go and find yourself in a SunGuard office and set up in there. And is a cloud exit plan, should that be taken like one of those sort of DR tests? Like today, our scenario is that we've not paid our hosting provider for a long time and they've withdrawn service like a certain social media company did. But we now have to be able to operate without this part of the infrastructure available to us.
So specifically within Digital Operational Resilience Act, I prefer DORA, the fact is there to say we have to be able to not just document how we would provide resilience in the event of a challenge, but we also have to test it and report upon that as well. So being able to essentially say, for this model that we're going to invoke today, we have this particular set of workloads that are now dead in the on-premises world or the cloud world or wherever. How are we going to show them now being recovered and provided at the same level of service in another location?
So that other location could be another cloud provider. It could be a different availability zone.
Absolutely.
I suppose it depends on the blast radius that you're considering for that test.
There's all sorts of ramifications we've got to take into account. It could be, are we looking at a multi-AZ model? Are we looking at a multi-region model? Are we looking at multi-cloud model? All sorts of different things need to be considered.
Okay, cool. So a bit of a question to the audience. I know we've got a range of people that don't have a cloud exit strategy because they don't have a cloud entrance one, through to people who are a little bit more advanced and may even work for some cloud providers. Thinking of that, I guess that sort of DR testing scenario, what do you test? When you used to have applications that were built to be highly available and they might have natively multi-AZ, what sort of scenarios do you test, if you test them at all? And I think Gareth might be around with a microphone if anyone wants to. Or just shout.
That was your first mistake. There's no Gareth.
Oh. No, Gareth, never mind. Just shout. That's why we scooched.
Do we have a Gareth recovery plan?
No. He's a single point of failure.
I'll tell him that.
It's all right, it's on camera.
You may edit that one out. You may repeat just in case.
Anyone? Go for it.
I guess it's availability, right? I mean, that's what you're looking to achieve with VCDR plan, whatever that may be. So, inline failover, doesn't impact your actual workload. You test all your procedures, make sure the orchestration works, all that good stuff. You can be looking to repatriate it out of a hyperscaler into an on-prem. How deep do you want to go ultimately? But as long as you understand what that would look like, you can pay it back based on DORA.
Mm-hmm.
Test, i.e. fail over all those workloads. There's loads of use cases.
There's a microphone.
I mean, I recall, and great answer. I mean, I used to work with a customer prior to joining VMware. They had 2 data centers. They were supposed to be running active standby. They had mainframes in the mix, active standby. And they were very lucky that they didn't have a failure event. Because although everything was supposed to be mirrored between the 2 locations, configuration, setup, you name it, there was one line of config missing in the secondary DC that should that have failed over, nothing would have worked. So in the first instance, being able to document is one thing, but actually being able to prove at the same time. I mean, in terms of organizations that are here, how many of you actively carry out a recovery test on the regular? 1, that's brilliant, that's good. Not quite the ratio I was hoping for, not going to lie. It's one of those things that although it might be documented, how do you know it is going to work?
I think since you're talking about mainframes, you probably want to make sure those people still exist and haven't retired.
Wow. Big deep freeze that's actually part of that DR test. We have to thaw them out first.
Ooh, shots fired.
No, that's some good points there. The other thing I was thinking of around mobility of applications, and sometimes maybe even at user groups, you see some fantastic PowerPoints that demonstrate the ability to move an application pretty much wherever you want it because it runs on some form of abstraction layer, whether that's at a hypervisor layer, whether that's at a container layer. But beyond the PowerPoint, what is the reality of trying to move those around?
You mean outside of PowerPoint engineering?
Yeah.
That never fails.
So when you're actually trying to move workloads from one beautifully abstracted layer to the next.
There's a lot to take into account there. There is a heck of a lot. I don't know how long have we got? Just be on the safe side. So connectivity, first thing. Without connectivity, nothing is going to work. And when I say connectivity, it's not just plumbing. We're not talking about a piece of wet string between point A and point B. We're talking about policies that sit alongside that as well. So we had Ant up here earlier talking about all the good things around advanced threat prevention, ransomware, et cetera, et cetera. If you don't have the same security policy in place on the recovery location, is that going to work? What happens if you've just left that as a default setting that could potentially be default deny? Nothing's working. So first of all, connectivity. Second of all, policy that sits in there, and security, routing, anything along those lines. Storage is important. Having capacity, not just for the virtual machine footprints, but also then ensuring you can access the relevant resources at the back end. If you're using cloud native services, ensuring that's available in there. The reachability of that information, if you've got synchronization across data stores to ensure that's in place. There's a lot of things to consider there again.
So, as you say, there's quite a few dependencies that kick about. What's the best way to actually discover those and to work out, okay, what are my dependency? In theory, obviously, the application's been wonderfully architected and they've been beautifully documented. But again, outside of the PowerPoint, how do you actually find those?
That's a damn good question. And there's different ways of doing different things, as always. So from a connectivity point of view, I know from a VMware perspective, things like Verni, in the first instance, being able to do that sort of connectivity trace, being able to see VMA, being able to talk to VMB, that sort of perspective. Then looking really through things like VROPS, Log Insight, being able to identify any of the dependencies in terms of the stacks that are in place. And realistically, going through and documenting. If you've got a CMDB that's in good health today, which I know that may well be PowerPoint engineering again, but in an ideal world, in an ideal world, having our CMDB up to date is going to be one of the fundamental parts to be in place there as well.
Yeah. So, as that exercise, say for application X, that either because it's been mandated by compliance or just because we want to know that we can put it wherever we need to put it, you're going to construct a set of in order for application X to run, I need this beyond the application itself. Mm-hmm. I need this from a connectivity point of view, security policy. I need logins for this, this, and this. Mm-hmm. And as long as that's documented and preferably that documentation is live, then you can start to prepare, okay, well, if we're going to move it, then put together a plan, I guess some form of Gantt chart or similar project management bit, to then put it where it is.
Absolutely.
We did cover earlier, but yeah, cloud exit is not necessarily just about bringing it back on-prem. You could be moving it to another hyperscaler. You could be moving it to the same hyperscaler in a different part of the world. Quite recently, we've had a company I work for has a SaaS platform, and we suddenly realised that the engineering teams had put what was supposed to be a standby area into a production one in Hong Kong, and storing passwords in Hong Kong is probably not something we want to be doing. So we had to quite rapidly switch that to Singapore. Thankfully, it wasn't a live service, but there was some fairly rapid cloud exit that had to be done from there because, no, not really too keen on putting that functionality there. So, it's not just about the big sort of headline stealing. Company X comes out of the cloud. There are lots of reasons why you might like to do it.
Quick question.
Go for it.
I know probably going back about a decade or so, there's a lot of talk about some code into the cloud, and most of the initiatives were like cloud first, put everything into the cloud, and then all of a sudden people started realizing, well, we really have to put into the cloud, and then there's a bit of a hybrid model only if you need to, because you have all this GDPR stuff that's like workloads that cannot be on-prem. And now we're talking cloud exit already. So I know there are different meanings, as you mentioned. When you say cloud exit, it doesn't necessarily mean out of the cloud. But is it a trend or a cycle that we're coming to? Is it like the cloud is now dying and we realize that suddenly probably there's better options out there? Or what is that?
Okay, that's a good one. IT is extremely cyclic. We go between centralized and decentralized infrastructures, and cloud and on-prem, I guess, is just one of those cycles. However, I don't think the cloud is dying anytime soon. I think it was the initial. There was a bit of a gold rush to go towards cloud for those that thought, "Yep, we're going to do it. This is going to make everything good for us." And then they realised, well, maybe we put a bit too much in, and there was a correction. I don't think they're going to overcorrect and suddenly pull everything out of. What do you guys think?
I think it's more of a case of. Hoping my mic is here. Okay, I think it's more of a case of workload placement. As to which ones are, because some are appropriate for the cloud, and a lot of people do see benefits in being like fully cloud native, but not everything is appropriate for the cloud. And depending on the jurisdiction, depending on availability zone, depending on where you are in the world, like you want to know where is the right place to actually place this workload. So I think cloud first was an interesting one, where it's like if you have a mentality of, okay, let's just take everything to the cloud, and we'll do this by this amount of time. One, you realize that actually it's a very long process, and you ask yourself, okay, wait, what value am I getting? In some cases, and then two, you realize actually there are some things that it's better to run on premise. There are some things that I need to think about. Where is it being run? Which jurisdiction is it being run? And when those complexities start to come into play, like when you may initially have a cloud first journey, but you start to really look at the implementation process or the complexity process or the different landscape, you then realize that actually it depends on the use case. It depends on where it's most appropriate for the workloads. And that's where we talk about multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, etc. I think it's more so workload placement, just understanding where is the right place, and what's appropriate for on-premise, what's appropriate for cloud, what are the requirements depending on which model you use.
Yeah, it seems to me there's a decision process that needs to be gone through when you're deploying a new application or service, of where is best to put it. Now, that could be, actually, we're only going to use this service for 4 months. Does it mandate standing up an entire infrastructure on-prem to do this? Yeah, we know it's going to be expensive, but we only need it for 4 months. Let's just put it in the cloud on that one, or somewhere that can loan us the infrastructure on that as needed basis, versus looking at the regulatory requirements as well as that. So without wanting to do too much of a cop out of it, depends. It kind of depends.
Workload first.
Yeah.
It's not cloud first. It's not on-prem first. It's workload.
It's the right place.
We've got to make sure that what that application service and the workloads that comprise it have all of their necessities and dependencies defined first. And then you're effectively going through a bit of a decision tree. Are we dropping it here? Are we dropping it there? Are we dropping it somewhere in the middle? It could even be something as simple as we're going edge compute rather than running everything up into the cloud to run certain things, or even bringing it back to our own data centers to run it. It's got a lot of different things to take into account: latency, regulatory, elasticity, if we're going to need that to come into play from a rapid scale up, scale down. Many, many different things that need to be considered. But certainly not cloud is dead. No chance.
I do.
From point of view.
I do think that what is interesting is that I heard in the talking about this, where they had a customer that wanted to go all in the cloud. They were like, we go all in, to, just delete our data center. And then about, I think it was 2 years, they realized actually, why are we doing this? Like what exactly is the need? Like the net benefit was just more so to position themselves as cloud first, as opposed to actually trying to quantify.
Yeah, it was more CIO bragging rights than actual benefit to the company.
Compromising and going for a hybrid strategy, but I think that is really interesting in terms of, like, in some scenarios actually, cloud may provide value, but in other scenarios you have to understand what value is it providing, and that very much depends on the workload. So I think it's just interesting to see what is the drive for some cloud first decisions. Is it especially for these traditional organizations that have large footprints, that runs well, it works. What would be the driver for them? Trying to adopt quite a crazy percent of X workload being migrated on at a very short amount of time.
There's the other side as well. If you are brand new organization, startup, probably going to end up being born in the cloud. Do you have the necessary CapEx to stand things up in the on-prem world? Probably not. If you did, is that going to be the best place to put those pounds, dollars, yen, whatever? Probably not. So being able to use something like the cloud to start off, get a bit of a minimum viable product in play, then make the decision if you want to scale that to the cloud, from the cloud to on-prem, depending on what's going on, by all means. But realistically, it really does come down to what is the workload need to be.
Oh, another question?
I think most of the time it comes down to sort of maturity, understanding. As you say, if you architect something in the cloud natively, there's probably going to be a growing pains of trying to take that anywhere other than the cloud. I think what happened, as you said, 10 years ago, was everyone was trying to get into the cloud for whatever reason. You know, it's going to be cheaper. That sort of story that we heard, and then say, actually, we're running an EC2 instance, what's running on-prem, 24/7. It's costing us way more than we thought. So we're told, you know, it's going to cost X based on it running 8 hours per day without any kind of automation around it. Therefore, let's go back on-prem. Whereas if you're looking at using things like microservices and serverless and everything being containerized and scaling properly, then it's almost, I would feel more capable to try and take something that's architected in that fashion back on-prem where you're looking at it running 24/7 again. So I think it's down to maturity, isn't it?
There is definitely a thread there. The maturity absolutely has to be considered. When you start to look at things like functions as a service, Lambda-esque sort of capabilities, are there ways of doing that on-prem? Absolutely. Is it going to be necessarily as simple, given cloud has this infinite level of resource beneath it? Probably not. But could it be done? Absolutely. And it really does come down to having that good understanding, and as you say, the majority piece, but the understanding of how your workloads are architected in the first place before making that decision of whether or not you should bring them on-prem or drop them and leave them in the cloud. A firm believer in just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Thinking on that maturity model in terms of a cloud exit and looking at the other end of the maturity scale, as it were, the stuff that you took to the cloud in your cloud journey in the first place, having been on that journey myself, we stripped out all the unnecessary crap that we weren't running. Those test environments that hadn't been turned on for 2 years, that server that it turns out isn't connected to anything, all that stuff got consolidated, stuff got scaled down and right sized. But all that stuff that then ended up in the cloud, if it was ported into, especially infrastructure as a service, that stuff is really comparatively easy to move back again, because we've made it nice and small. We know we need it, and we know that it runs on premises. So if we wanted to, we took that thing up 5 years ago. As long as we haven't done anything to it, we can probably bring that back. We've still got to do that connectivity stuff, but all that, it's actually more mature, isn't it? Because it's been around for longer.
Pretty much.
It's this immature new stuff.
Well, there's that thread. I mean, when you look at a lot of customers that I'm talking with today, they're saying, we're going cloud. We don't want to have a full-blown data center today, or data centers, I should say. We want to be able to get some quick wins by taking those, I hate the phrase, low-hanging fruit workloads that are on-prem, drop them into a landing zone inside the cloud that has close proximity to those cloud-native services, so that they can show very, very quick wins and being able to do that. So that's nice and simple. We can do that. The VMC offerings, really, really straightforward. Then it becomes a point of, okay, we've done that. We've proven that what we wanted to do worked. So we've got our traditional workloads running alongside some of those cloud-native services. Do we then want to bring them back? And in some cases, yes. In some cases, no. They want to take more and drop that into the cloud. That's fine. But if you wanted to then bring them back, you then have a lot of other things to consider, like, what about my IP addressing? How is my routing going to be taken care of there? Are we going to preserve those IP addresses that we've moved in the first place in, which we may have extended that subnet for a time and allowed that reachability to remain the same. If we have done that and then severed the connection back to the on-prem, for example, there are some applications where people have written them in what I call lazy coding. So they're hard coding IP addresses. Anyone come across that fun and games before? Couple of people, yeah. It's not that regular. Whereas, of course, if you use DNS, it becomes nice and simple from that point of view. Again, I'm saying that slightly with my fingers crossed. It's not all that easy still. But if you then you've severed the link, you didn't want to bring a link back up from a layer 2 extension piece back on-prem, and you decided to try and do a lift and shift with those IP addresses preserved, or even having to change them, worst case, how do you know you're not going to break your application?
But that's the same thing you did in the other direction. You have experience of moving application X from one site to another, that's the second site being the cloud, and doing all that re-IPing or setting up those links. So
I guess it depends upon how.
You broke down all the problems you faced along the way.
Absolutely, fully documented, step by step. Yeah, we all do it.
So bring it back easy. Just follow those, turn the page upside down.
It's just like a Haynes manual. It's reverse of disassembly.
And if you've done a DR test properly and done complete IP testing as well with that, then you're perfectly okay.
It's all gravy, absolutely. I mean, it does depend upon what the mechanism was you used in the first place as well. So if you've re-IP'd and done the flip, no problem. It is, in theory, going to be the same in reverse. If you used extension tech to make that happen, then just spin the extension tech back up and flip it back and off we go. Again, the only thing you've got to start to take into account then is connectivity, making sure that your routing is reconverged, making sure that you're announcing the prefixes in the right location, making sure someone isn't doing something funky a little bit upstream in terms of route policy. And of course, security, because that is slightly important.
I think it's also like it feeds in that topic of resiliency, and I think a big part of that is also like being able to properly map key dependencies required for any workload or application, and that again goes down to documentation. That again goes down to how things are configured and defined. If they are done in a way where there is actually clear dependency mapping as to what maps to what, etc., and what is required for a migration, that then obviously allows things to be easier. So if we're thinking in the context of resiliency, where you do ongoing tests to say, actually, can I migrate it from here to here? You're able to then kind of say, actually, what errors will come up, or what changes will come up, or what do I need to do in my dependency mappings to make sure that I don't break my application should I require doing. I think that's essentially why a lot of these regulators, particularly for critical applications, these things actually shouldn't be happening, mandate ongoing tests and demonstrable examples as to if it can be done, so that there isn't there is leeway, if it was just moving a less critical or simple workload across.
Cool. I think we've probably got time for one more question, if there were any. If not,
Do you mean we're in front of people going for VBers? Is that it?
well, we're in front of Dave,
So that's not VBers.
and Dave's in front of VBS,
Okay,
and he'll
I
tell
feel
you
better
all
now.
about those. Brilliant. Well,
We've got one.
So, edge computing as part of a cloud exit strategy. Are you actually seeing many people doing that? We obviously hear Joe talking about his flying police car as his edge case. That's obviously quite a niche example. But are you seeing it done at scale, or is it still niche from your experience with your customers?
So from my experience, given it's a very specific segment, right now, this particular area, not so much in terms of edge. There are conversations happening in certain subsets of the vertical in terms of whether we can put certain workloads onto edge to give better response times for certain things. But outside of that, little embryonic from my side at this moment in time.
Outside in the rest of the partner world, though, it's quite big, particularly in telco.
There we go. Oh, telco, absolutely. Retail, absolutely.
Yeah, thanks for the microphone. Yeah, happy to talk about it now. We can talk about it later. But it's massive in the telco world. BT, Vodafone, VMO2, where 5G is meaning that you're having to put your compute and your storage close to where your transmitters and receivers are, because of the speed that the handsets, etc., are actually sucking the data out of your applications, then our edge is vital in that kind of use case. Also, where's Edwards? Is he still in here? Oh yeah, here he is, back here. He can talk to you as well about use cases where mobile edge, which you were just talking about there with the police car, but also in the retail space, where you need a small footprint in a ruggedized environment to support EPOS, retail signage, all those sorts of things. Again, the edge compute platform plays really, really nicely in the retail and in the healthcare as well, for, you know, if you've got massive image or data manipulation, such as, you know, radiology, X-rays, MRI scans, all those sorts of things, then again the edge compute platform plays really well there. But it's in a different model than in the old distributed client server network, in that where you had the things out in the edge doing whatever the hell they liked. It was a server running under Dave's desk, running whatever you wanted. The whole point behind the edge approach is that even though it's on the edge, it's operated in a consistent way, managed as though it was in the data center. It might still be under Dave's desk, but it's managed centrally. There we go. What? Yeah. Well, next to his bare metal Kubernetes that he's running, which he hasn't told the IT department about.
I think Dave's going to get the good news soon, isn't he?
Thanks for your time, Dave. There's the door. Sorry to step in. Thank you.
All good.
Anyone else?
Ready for the beer.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much, Tommy.
Brilliant.
Thanks,
Yes.
guys.
Cheers, everyone. Thank you.